Live streaming is on.
Hello, everybody. Finally, let me see if YouTube is working because I don't trust this shit. After today we are not making a record. The record was 37 tries the other day. I think we got to 20 now. But yes, we're live finally. So hello, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever. If you're watching live or not, depending on your time zone. I have a public service announcement as usual. Wear your fucking mask, you idiots. Okay? Not for you. Maybe for somebody else. If you want to die, that's your problem. But you know what? You can kill somebody else. And that part, I care. So please, or not please, wear your mask. And if you don't like this message, you can just quit now, stop watching this because I don't give a shit. That said, hello everybody. And now with us, the amazing, my brother, my friend, family, the genius Paul Jenkins. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, mate. It's great to chat with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine here. Just being polite with people as usual. You know me. How are you and the family? How's everything on your side? On your side?
Yeah, well, we live in Georgia, so we live near Atlanta, and so it's a bit crazy because it's crazy for everybody in the world, so it's no worse for us than anyone. But America's a bit of a challenge right now, and we're hoping that people will start getting their brains together and to solve this problem.
Mm-hmm. So, sooner or later, let's just hope somebody puts some sense into them. Maybe we just call Harley Quinn and tell her to use her bat, something like that. But let's hope we don't need that. What's the thing you miss the most? If they tell you, as I always ask this question, if they tell you, knock knock, hey Mr. Jenkins, Jenkins family, this is over. You're free. Open the door. You can do whatever you want. What's the first thing you could do?
What's the first thing I do? Make a film. I work on that's the thing I'm missing the most right now is the film stuff that we were building. And, we had just shot a couple of things. We were working on a couple of shows and we have one lined up, but it's difficult to know what the rules are going to be. So, I think for me personally, it will be going back to make films because then you can get with the crew and you have the camaraderie and you do all the stuff. It's great. I love doing it. It's my favorite thing. It's what I was trained for. It's what I went to college for. So I miss that. And then I think, we were never really big on restaurants and stuff like that. We don't do that too much. I think the kids miss school so much. So for all children in the world that can't go to school, the social, interactions are very important, and so we're hopeful that we fix it sometime in the next year.
Hope so. Do you miss going to the movies at all, or you guys were not? You didn't usually go to the theater. Aside of the typical movies you have to go to watch with the kids, of course, because they demand and you have to do it. But aside of those, do you miss anything? Going to the movies?
No, I don't think so. I think that we would tend to be active. We go outside. We can still do that, right? Because obviously the way that COVID works, if you work out the right equation, we can go outside. We can go for hikes. We can do things that work like that. So we're actually still doing those kind of things. And I don't really miss a lot of the sort of restaurants and movies and all that other kind of social thing. I think we tend to, the boys, my two boys end up playing with their friends. They miss their friends, right? That's the problem for kids. We have a whole generation of kids that are going to have 1 year at least of difficulty with their interactions. It's a shame.
Yeah, but you know what? They'll embrace it. They'll embrace it much more. John Bogdanov was asking me the other day if with this COVID thing, he loves the Spanish culture as you do, and he was telling me, you people are so close.
Yeah.
And Adam Glass was telling me the same. You are like real community. Everybody treats everybody like family and all that. And I'm worried that with this thing, you're going to change. You're going to become more cold. And I was like, no, if you knew us at all, and anything you do, it's going to be exactly the opposite.
Yeah, I think so.
What do you mean? Like, it's going to get us closer. The moment we can hug everybody, we're going to be like fucking, grizzly bears. We're going to jump on people and embrace everybody and just be closer. It's going to, this is causing extremes, as we were saying before, in a good way and in a bad way. Do you think?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I feel that in some ways, the difficulty that the world is having, there's lots of difficulties, right? It's not just COVID. It's the political climate. It's this stuff. Now, I don't do politics because I grew up in a punk, man. I don't politics. Here's my public service message, right? Politics is a self-enrichment scam. So if you think that your politician is the best one, you're wrong. It's a self-enrichment scam. So I don't trust them, any of them. And so what's happening is you see the world very divided, and I think it's very, very sad to see it, because people, I live in Georgia, where there's a lot of people on the right, you know, they live in, you know, and they're friends, and they're so frustrated with people on the left. And I work in the entertainment industry where people are very much on the left, and they're so frustrated with people on the right. But, you know, you can't block everyone on your social media. You can't stop all the people you don't like. That's what's being encouraged. And so I'm hopeful that the other side of this will be, when this all ends, when the divisive nature of the politics changes, and it will, that we will be more friendly, like the Spanish, right? I actually understand why you guys are going to be even more excited to be together, right? And I'm hopeful that that will happen here, but we're being divided in America very much. So it's a challenge, you know.
As you just said, in college, you started to become a filmmaker. So and it's been like a round journey for you. You got back to it. But why comics? Why comics? Why did you get in comics, and why did you make a career in comics?
Accidental tourist, I think. Why comics? You know, I've spoken in the last 2 years more about my upbringing. You know my mom, right?
Yeah.
You met my mom, and you know that as she's a very interesting person, right? Very unusual. She's definitely one of a kind, but she raised my brother and I by herself, and my dad had left, right? And so we were extremely poor. We lived on a farm. Sometimes we lived with no electricity, you know, no heat. And so when you grow up in that kind of environment, you don't get a lot of exposure to entertainment. And so we didn't have a television. And the only thing that we got sometimes was a roll of comics. It was Spider-Man reprints, Daredevil reprints, and then the British comics, right? And the ones I loved the most were very much like Garth Ennis, actually. I grew up trying to find the war comics that were these little, they were about this big. They were called Commando. And
you too?
Yeah, I read those. Yeah, I love
amazing.
those things. If I could find one, but I didn't have any money, so we'd have to. So we stole them, yeah. And we would, and we would also see the reprints of the 1950s EC comics. So we saw horror, and we saw science fiction, and we saw war comics much more than we saw Spider-Man or anything. But I kind of got to see Spider-Man sometimes. And so they were in my world, and I knew about comics. I had no intention of working in comics, but I came to America, and I was doing music. I was teaching music and drama because I'd done acting. To learning disabled children, and I ended up staying here because I met the guys who created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? So now I'm suddenly working in comics with no intention of it, but I'm also working in licensing and video games and design and everything like that. And then we did Tundra Publishing, and Tundra was a big thing. Kevin Eastman and I recently did a 7-part discussion series about our careers and our friendship, because we've known each other now for 30 years, which is crazy. And we talked about Tundra Publishing and what a big moment it was for comics. But I had been a part of Ninja Turtles, then Tundra, the Creators Bill of Rights. Then I go to write Hellblazer, and I don't know how I got that job. I shouldn't have got that job. I had never written anything in my life, and I met the editor, and he asked me, "What have you written?" And I said, "I'll be honest, I've never written anything." And somehow I got the job. And then from there, I did Marvel Nights, and that changed comics. And so I feel like I have been a part of the history of comics in a weirdest way, even though I'm an accidental tourist and I'm just along for the ride. But I love the medium, right? It's the oldest form of artistic, human artistic expression. Cave paintings are sequential narratives.
Yeah.
And so we have been telling stories with comic books for the duration of human history.
Yeah, it's funny because there's an Antonio Banderas movie about the guy who discovered. I don't think everybody except for Spain watched it, but I love the movie about the guy who discovered the Altamira caves. Which is
Oh
supposed to
yeah,
be the oldest, and it's
yeah.
a really amazing movie. And how his daughter, when nobody believed him, of course, the church wanting to him to shut up, etc., and all that, and everybody took him for crazy, and said he painted it, of course, all that shit, and how his daughter, kept the legacy,
Yeah.
and until the French discovered the Lascaux ones, then the French started saying, "Oh, this is true." Like,
Yes.
wait. So the Spanish ones weren't true, but when you have one, now it's real, and all that. So it's really funny in a way.
Yeah.
But I remember when I watching that movie with. No, I was talking about that movie to somebody. I literally said what you just said. They were like, "Those are the first comics,"
Yep.
and they were like, "Well, you're always trying to make it all into comics. Like, is it sequential narration or not? Yes. Is it storytelling? Yes or not? Yes. What is comics in the end? It's sequential storytelling. So if we say Yellow Kid or this or that is the first comic, I always say, no, in one way or the other, comics have been with us since the beginning.
Yep. Yeah. And, we are now learning that if you think of, human cultures, I think Altamira is probably about 12,000 years, maybe, I think something like that. Right? I can't remember the numbers, but I think Lascaux and Altamira are pretty contemporary as people spread into Europe and moved across.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's so much, two sides of the frontier. So it's got to be like, I don't know, probably little small difference. Yeah.
Right. But then when you go to Australia, when you go to see where the Australian natives, Aboriginal people had been, and they have caves now. I mean, how incredible that a World Heritage site was just blown up for a quarry, right? Yeah. They just destroyed. But in there are paintings and pictures, right? Old carvings in the rock. They're comic books. And those things may be 40 to 60,000 years old. So yeah, comic books are hardwired into us as a form of art. But it's the question of the business, right? Like, how do we give comics to people? How do people use comics? And of course, I'm in a lot of new media work. I do a lot of so I'm working on a form of comics right now that are a new form of comic book storytelling using digital assets. Mm-hmm. So now we can use comics with sound and the right kind of move. Like, I don't really care for motion comics. They're like bad animation.
Yeah, I was going to interject that, saying, but it's close to, if you were said just a second ago, but they are close to motion comics, I would just answer, ugh. I'm sorry.
No, motion comics I don't like. But these things, the one that I'm working on, think of a way. I mean, I'll give away a little bit, and then we don't have to talk too much about it. But imagine that you have a comic book panel, and it's a time travel story, and you show the panel, and then you travel in time, you come back, and now something disappears from the panel. In other words, not movement, but just something. It helps you to tell the story. So we're doing that kind of thing where you can use digital assets and then what you should be able to do is to move it. You have to make it move. You can't, if it moves by itself, it's poor animation. But if it's interactive, where you touch it and it does the thing in the panel, that means that you have a story that's interactive. And I work with interactive stories because I do a lot of video game work. So, I believe in that form of storytelling.
Yeah, I was going to say that for you, it's got to be, again, a part of the journey, because you've done comics editing and all the other, merchandising parts and all that. But let's focus on the creative parts here, And I consider an editorial creator, as you know, too, a part of the creative team. So you've done the editorial part, you've done the writing part in comics, but also in video games and also in movies.
Yep.
So reaching this thing you're talking about is also gonna be a meld of your experiences, right? A fusion of experiences.
Yeah, and my company, Meta, META, Meta Studios. Like, if you think of a meta thing, it's like an abstract overview of everything. If you have a meta outside view, but Meta is an acronym. It stands for Media, Education, Technology, and Advancement. I love educating. I love mentoring people. I wish I had one myself when I was young. We like to advance our creative community. We work with new technologies, and media is what we do. So it's not film, it's not television, it's not animation, it's not comics, it's not video games, it's all of them. And in this world, people want entertainment that is everything. They want to be able to buy the comic see the animation and play the video game and buy the merchandise. That's what people want. And so I'm in the business of making the everything, which I think is useful.
Also, sorry, what do you think? We were talking about Altamira before I made the question, so it's good. What do you think it makes that comic language, storytelling, narration, composition, whatever you want to call it, but in this case we're talking about the storytelling, so intertwined with our genetics?
Yeah, I think it's because but that's a great question. I think it has something to do with the fact that, what is intertwined with our genetics: music, comic book storytelling, dance, visual expression, right? They're tied in, but acting and theater did not come first. It took the Greeks to create theater. We did not put ourselves in another body and then express it, but we did with dance, and we did with art and comics. And so I think it has something to do with the fact that we, on a visceral level, on a personal level, when we see an expression, we can immediately understand it. We can see it with color.
Yeah.
Because color tells a story. Color is very important to tell a story. Movement. So we could not draw movement because things don't move. Not when you're drawing them on a cave. They do now in film. But we couldn't then. And so what we were trying to do was to express movement and to express things that were important, to keep a record of what was said. Ever since there's been forms of writing, we have been able to write down, the ancient Sumerians used to write stuff down, and they used to put it on tablets, right? And so we've wanted to record ourselves. We want to show people who we are. And comics were the first way that we did it. Those people in those caves were literally just telling us a story. Yeah. Because let me tell you something, dude, story is everything. Yeah. Always. In everything that we do. Our whole day is a story. And so I believe that, and I believe it can be brought into the new media. But as long as story wins, and in the business of comics, for example, story doesn't always win. Like in the entertainment business, it's about money sometimes and other things, and it should always be about story. And that's where I come from. It's why I sometimes can thrive in comics and sometimes not.
It's also, I remember once when I was, watching the Altamira images, and it's like, that somebody said of course, on Facebook or Twitter or something like that, but that's wrong. It has too many legs, or there's too many arrows. And I was like, that's movement. They are portraying movement. Like, now that you say it, like, just think that they were telling a story and they didn't have the means, so they had to invent the language.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think that the primordial things, I don't know if you say it this way, but I think we agree, is the primordial is music, dance, and sequential storytelling. Those are the first thing that humanity invented that made us human in a way. Your body reacts to the sounds that creates the music, and you want to tell a story, so you create the paintings.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. No. I think. Yeah. It's actually. I think I said that probably 3 or 4 minutes ago. There's that music, dance, visual expression. Art. Right. Sound. These are things that we can do. It almost reminds me of sports, right? Like why is football, soccer, the biggest sport? Because you need 2 people and a ball of some kind. It's the easiest thing to be able to play. You don't, American football or something else, you need more people and more stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But you only need 2 people and a ball to play soccer, right? And so it's the same with art, right? You need a cave and some color, and now you can make a picture. What do you need for music? Just the sound of you. So we would be, and that's what we did, because that's all we had, So I think that it's easy to understand why this is our best form of storytelling, or one of our most important forms. Absolutely. And people look at it badly and they say, it's just for kids, or it's stupid, or well, we make it stupid sometimes. That doesn't mean to say that it is stupid.
Yeah, you cannot judge an art form, but because of an example. But also, if we go to that, we got to remember always. I'm really in a pain in the ass with this, but I think it's really important to remind people about pattern recognition. I always say the same thing that saved us from whatever kind of animal that was rustling in the before some leaves, and it's like, oh shit, I'm hearing a noise, run or I'm gonna die. Is the first thing that is the second thing that creates storytelling.
Yeah,
that's the story you could tell. The first thing is how we survive, how we can get along, without those animals killing us. Or that leaf, you don't touch that leaf because it's toxic, it's venom and it's going to kill you. So survival, pattern recognition is what made us what we are. And this is also what created sequential storytelling, which is why I always say, and that's what I want to ask you if you agree, why we can go from, Superman opens and next panel is Superman is already flying.
Right.
And we need to cover the gaps. How do we mentally know how to cover those gaps?
Well, I was lucky enough to work at Tundra, and at Tundra, Scott McCloud brought us Understanding Comics, right? Yeah. And Scott talks about it. He has the best way of articulating it, and he says, "Look, here's the first panel. Superman does this. Here's the second panel. Superman is flying. But our brains, we tell the story. We love to tell stories. Yes. So if you think of comics, it is an interactive story. It's no surprise that I went to go and work in video games because comics are an interactive story. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is a very interesting thing to understand. Comics are hardwired into our brains because we've been doing them for thousands and thousands of years. And they are we have to look at the pieces and put the pieces together ourselves. We tell the story. It's not just the storyteller, it's us. We tell the story as well.
Mm-hmm. And also another thing that I love about the comics language, and I'm going to say it again, is that we are the only art form who can defy Einstein's theory of relativity, because we control time and space from the first corner of the first panel to the last corner of the last panel of the story. Everything is time control. No other art can do this.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it's a great point. We're a unique form of art. No one is no one. Let's put it this way. I've spoken to novelists, I've spoken to filmmakers, and I've asked them about writing comics, and they find novels a lot easier than comics. They find filmmaking a lot easier than comics. Comics are very difficult because you take frozen moments in time, like a panel and a panel, and you juxtapose them next to each other. Mm-hmm. You have to cut out almost all of the story and trust that your audience will tell the story for you. So it's a very, very different form of storytelling.
Yeah. Also, Mark Brooks told me the same a couple of weeks ago, that every time he meets with people in storyboarders or people working in illustrators. I mean, working in movies or in video games or in other. He's asked if they don't know him. Well, yes, I'm a comic artist. Like, how do you guys do that? That's impossible. That's so difficult. And I keep hearing the same thing, from novelists, from illustrators. That's why it bums me and irritates me so much when I hear somebody, diminishing comics. And go ask novelists, go ask illustrators, go ask them what's the most difficult thing to do. And the most underpaid, let's be honest.
Underpaid. And I work in all those media. I work in film, I work in television, I work in video games, I work in comics, I'm writing novel right now. So I do all of these things. And the hardest one to do, it's not hard for me because I've done so many of them, but the most challenging one to think about and to prepare is always comic books. Mm-hmm. So, I stand for us. I definitely would stand on my little soapbox at times and say, if you think comics are dumb entertainment for dumb children, people always say that about video games as well. But I've worked a lot in pioneering methods of storytelling in video games, and people say, oh, it's just shooting people. It's like, well, have you played a video game lately? Try Assassin's Creed, try The Last of Us. Mm-hmm. These are difficult, they're beautiful.
Yeah, but at the same time, when you write a comic, or let's say a novel or a video game, whatever, do your characters ever fight you? And I mean, you think you're going in a direction and suddenly your characters start telling you, no, you're wrong, go the other direction. That's not something I would do, in a way.
Yeah. No, not in comics. Yes, in screenplays. Yes, in film.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing a film, and I'm a super prep guy. I am very prepped. I have my stuff ready, and I design it. I will show you kind of here. Here you go. So the way that I do my stuff is I build my stories out. I hope you can see this a little bit. I build out panel by panel, and I design the story first, and I prep it. I don't know how different I am, but I am very diverse in the kind of stuff I like. If it's a good romance, I want to do romance. If it's good, superhero, I'll do that, I hope. But I'm very, very prepared, and I care very much about telling the story the right way. And so, when I'm working on a comic, I'm very meticulous, and I want to make sure that I'm giving a message. Like, it's not just about like, I'll tell you a small anecdote. When I broke into comics, I was working on Hellblazer, and I would do single issue Hellblazer stories, and they're very difficult stories to write. And I remember sitting with a guy who worked in comics, and he is more of a guy, more of a fan of comics. Like, I don't really know that much about superheroes. No matter how many I've done, I really wasn't a guy that knew a lot about them. And he asked me, "What are you writing about?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing about a sort of an existential question of whether or not all of the major disasters in history are tied through time and space." And John Constantine sees this. And I told him this crazy story I'm doing in one issue. And I said, "What are you working on?" And he sort of looked at me and said, "Bringing back the Green Goblin." I thought, yeah, man, like I'm doing this crazy experiment. I'm like a crazy wizard over here, but I get it. You're working on a simple story that like people love, right? They're really intrigued by it. There are lots and lots of different approaches to comics. I think my approach is slightly unique. I want to challenge myself as a storyteller. So I do not get attacked by my characters. They don't go off by themselves. But what does happen is that sometimes I'm writing something and I'm writing dialogue. I find dialogue to be very easy. It just comes. And so I will say that they talk to me, and I just try to keep up by typing. They speak.
Yeah, that's what I was asking in a way. If they speak back to you, but they speak back to you saying, "Nope, not. That's not something I could say, or that's not something I could do."
Yeah, I suppose it's true, but it's more like I've set them up to speak, right? I know my structure. I do all of the work, and I set them up, and I know kind of what they're saying, and then I start typing, and I'm just listening to them, right? And they do the thing that they do. But I have prepared some of the things that they're going to say as well. I know some of my moments and my lines. All of it goes in this book. All the dialogue and everything sits in these crazy books.
Preparation.
I have loads of them sitting right there.
What's the core of a story for you? Is this the structure? Is the emotion? It's the plot points. What is the core for you when you start thinking about the story?
It's the emotion every time. To me, the atmosphere, the feeling, the emotion, the character. People have different approaches, right, David? So, I have always been known as the character and story guy. I mean, I'm not going to be your guy who understands how Spider-Man in issue 306 once had a fight with some character that I've never heard of, right? It's been well documented that when I came into Marvel, I'd been writing Hellblazer. They asked me if I wanted to do superheroes, and they said, "Why don't we do the Inhumans?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great." And who are they? Never heard of them. And so they had sent me 2 5-page stories by Jack Kirby. And because of the way that I know my brain works, I actually said, "That's it. Like, please don't send me anymore. I don't want to read a load of Inhumans comics. It won't help me." And from those 2 5-page Jack Kirby stories, we wrote a 12-issue maxi series that won an Eisner for Marvel, right? Like that stuff is built into the characters. I'm not the guy who knows anything about these characters. And I have written books. I wrote Dead Man for DC and New 52. They wanted me to revive. They loved that book. They would always call me and say, "We love it." I'm like, "I never heard of Dead Man 2 weeks ago," right? I just did Black Adam. Never heard of him. have done this repeatedly. I did the origin of Cobra Commander one time for G.I. Joe. The whole origin, which they use as the canon origin now. I don't know anything about G.I. Joe. I saw them as toys. That's it. We had Action Man in Britain, so I didn't really care.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you can write good stories just using the basic stuff. You don't have to read a million comics to know how to write a comic.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at people and care about storytelling and characterization. And that's my thing. So, it works. It especially worked during the Marvel Knights time because Marvel were in bankruptcy and they needed to rebuild their content. But then there are times when they go, when we don't need that anymore. We're doing fine. We want crossovers. And if it's crossovers and self-referential stuff, things that refer to each other, I'm probably not your guy.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. In that era, with you, with Brian Bendis and others, by the end of the day, continuity was there, but it wasn't the sainthood pole you cannot touch,
Right.
because people complains about you guys not caring about storytelling, about continuity, and my answer always is one thing is not caring, and another thing is knowing when you need it and when you don't. And people confuses. We don't need it now. We're telling a different story with not caring. And I know you guys care a lot, but in the time and place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, that's right. And so I think that if you just live with what's happened before, continuity, it will handicap you in a terrible way. You can't tell half of your stories because it may contradict something. I will look at certain moments of my time in Marvel. I'm writing Spider-Man with Mark Buckingham, and we were doing loads and loads of single issues. And I'll tell you right now that there are 2 single issues that people come up to me, even to this day, and I know that they have that issue because they're holding it in both hands, and they're trembling, and they come up and they're crying, and they ask me to sign these particular issues, right? So we were allowed to create art, and right at the very end of it, Humberto Ramos and I did our first book together, and it was The Revenge of the Green Goblin, and it was a really cool story, and it was the definitive Green Goblin type of story. And it was a time when they just said, go do it. Tell the story. We're not going to tell you what to do. They never edited me at Marvel, ever. They didn't edit me through Civil War Frontlines. They didn't edit me through any of this stuff until World War Hulk. And then they give me they ask us to come back and do World War Hulk Frontlines, and I start getting phone calls from them, and it's, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I'm like, where did this come from? We've never done this. Everything we've done has had tremendous success. Why now? And I can tell you why now. Why now is a year later they sold to Disney. Here's our change. And we are now a corporation, and thanks, we got it from here. And I feel like, yeah, cool. Go off and do it. It's not for me because I'm not going to be allowed to tell the kind of stories that make sense to me. And it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for me. They don't want challenging stories anymore. They want to just take it back in, do 5-issue series, crossovers, all the kind of stuff. And I'm never going to be a crossover guy, David, because I don't know enough about comics to cross over.
What's the story you would like to tell right now? If they tell you, pick a character. If you are interested at all, which is another thing, but if they told you, pick a character at DC and another one at Marvel, tell the story you want to tell.
So I've never been that guy. I remember, I used to be Alan Moore's editor, right? And so I got to learn a lot from getting the scripts for From Hell and Big Numbers and talking to Alan all the time. And I found in the strangest way, and this is before I was a writer, I was an editor at the time, I found that I was so much like Alan. And I thought, well, that can't be a bad thing, right? Everything he says, I'm like, I'm already doing that. Yeah, good. I feel like I'm getting reinforced by someone that I respect very much. I don't care. You could give me anything, man. You could give me any character and I would go, great. Now, that being said, I think perhaps there's maybe one character, which is a really surprising one, that I would say, oh, yeah, I'd like to write that character because it was. So I created the Sentry because of Our Man. So what happened was I would talk to Karen Berger. I created the Sentry maybe 4 years before we published him, and I got rejected constantly. This is when I first tried trying to be a writer, and I would ask, I want to be a writer, I want to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was just getting to know Karen Berger, and she had given me the job at Hellblazer. And I said, well, I'd like to do this other character I've created. And she said, listen, I'll be honest with you. No, so I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I said, I would like to do Our Man because I think he's such an interesting question. If I had a pill that made me a superhero for 1 hour, then I would be addicted to that immediately. It would be a great story of addiction. 23 hours of my day would be thinking, I need the pill, I need the pill, I need the pill, I need the pill. I want to get the pill. Please let me have it. You know, you'd be a complete addict. And then for 1 hour, you'd get the rush. So I wanted to tell a story about drug addiction. And Karen said, you know, honestly, I don't think we'd ever do that kind of story now. Not Vertigo. Frankly, if Alan pitched me, say, Watchmen, I wouldn't do it. You know, it's not a Vertigo book. But she said, you should create a character. And I said, okay, great. And so I created the Sentry to tell some of that story, and it grew from the story I did. So if you were to ask me one character, I would love to tell that story with Our Man, because I still didn't really tell it with the Sentry. A story of addiction through a superhero pill. Man, would that be an intense book. Other than that, give me anything, man. Like I said, if I've never heard of the character, give me 10 minutes. I'll give you a good pitch, you know?
Yeah, Our Man, that story in... especially now that they have Black Label, you know, which is the place to tell different kind of stories with the classic characters. That would be amazing. Mark Doyle, if Chris Conroy and the others, if you're listening, Our Man. Let me say hello to people here, so they don't think we are ignoring them. Hello, Felipe. He says, I have always been interested in your run with Inhumans. For me, one of your best works. Did you plan everything? Your characters and the story of that city was superb.
Yeah, we planned everything. I mean, I wrote a 12-issue series out, and once they called me, Jay Lee called me, and Jay and I were supposed to do Hellblazer Hellshot crossover, and we never knew what to do. And so one day he called me and he said, hey, Marvel are talking to me about doing this thing called Marvel Nights. Are you interested? And I said, yeah, we finally get to work together. And he said, okay, so how about the Inhumans? And that's why I said, I said, sure, I don't know who they are. So from that, I wrote a 12-issue series pitch, and we took it to Marvel, and Joe and Jimmy were upstairs. They were on the very top floor of Marvel. And I think it's fair to say that there was some tension. Not those guys were fine, but the tension was with the people at Marvel. Because the people within Marvel didn't understand why two guys from outside had come in with new materials and brought in people like myself and Jay. They had Kevin Smith. You know, this was a moment. There were 4 books: Punisher, Inhumans, Black Panther, and Daredevil. Mm-hmm. And we came in with these books. And so I brought this 12-issue maxi series, this big pitch, and I had to pitch it to Bob Harris as one pitch, and I had to pitch it to Chris Claremont as the other. Mm-hmm. And the question was, you know, whether or not they would say yes. And I mean, my pitch was giant. I'm not sure they understood it. So I had written it before I wrote it, you know.
And they said yes.
Yes, they said yes.
As history shows. Looney Comics says, Jenkins, your Witchblade run was everything to me. Okay. And Geraldo Borges says, just hi to Mr. Jenkins. My first job for American Comics was Darkness Level 0 for Top Cow, written by him. Thank you.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. So those are both Top Cow things. So interesting. So I have been a guy, you know, you and I have chatted about this a little bit, but I've always been a guy. I am not an insider to comics. I don't say a lot of comic stuff on my social media feeds. I don't talk about lots of different things. I have had my own quiet revolution always, right? One of the things is I have never been interested in stupid, over-sexualized women, right? Like I kind of hate it because it's a bad story. And so Matt Hawkins at Top Cow had asked me for years, would you write Witchblade? He actually asked me for like 2 years, and I said, no, thanks. I don't get it. I am not going to tell a story in which she turns her powers on and basically becomes naked. I don't get it. It's stupid. And what I had asked Matt was, man, I think you're missing something. I think the opportunity here is that she's a young, attractive woman who works as a detective in the NYPD. We should tell that story. What a great story that would be. And she's sexy anyway. She's got t-shirt and jeans. Like, great. She's beautiful. Then tell that story, because it would be an interesting story of a young woman who's very physically attractive, trying to become, to be taken seriously and be a detective. And she has a problem, right? They finally let me do it. Well, what do you think they made the TV show? Right? Like, look, they made the TV show. So then I come into Darkness, and they had, and finally, I think that project, to be fair, had kind of wandered around for a long time. I don't think anybody knew what they wanted to do with it. And they let myself and Dale Keown do it. And I think within one issue, we built the emotional core of it, which is his relationship with his girl. And then he loses her. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, you worked on that book for maybe 18 months. And I say, I worked on the Darkness for about 7 years. I wrote the game, and the game became more prevalent in pop culture. And then I wrote the second game, and I creatively directed a lot of it. So you have to understand that I lived with the Darkness for about 7 years, and that character was great. I loved it. Dale Keown and I had the best time doing that book.
Mm-hmm. Would you ever come back to it, or you told the stories you had to tell with the Darkness and that's it?
Yeah, there are some characters that I would come back to. Not too many. Axel Alonso asked me to do Inhumans 2 one time, and I told him no, because I don't think you could ever recreate the view of that book. Like, people look at Inhumans through rose-colored glasses. It's the greatest book ever. Well, I'm not exactly going to write the sequel then, right? Because you're going to hate it no matter what I write. Mm-hmm. Darkness would be one I would do more of. I could tell 50 more Spider-Man stories in a minute. I would do Spider-Man in a heartbeat. There are, and Captain America I would probably write again, because I didn't even come close to telling all the Captain America stories. But my feeling on that is just, those stories, if they don't live in the Darkness or Spider-Man or Captain America, will live somewhere else anyway. I don't need Captain America to tell a story.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was asking because Looney Comics has any stories for Hellblazer you couldn't do because of editorial, no, you can't say that. You can't tell that story.
Well, not stories, because Hellblazer, man, I mean, they'll let you tell a lot of stories, right? That was fine. But there were funny moments where they would tell me, you've done too much. So I want to tell one funny story about that, right? We wrote this is a true story. We wrote, because a lot of Hellblazer was based on my life and my brother and my mom and my family. It was all about living in the countryside. And that's where I grew up. And I grew up, in a caravan at times. And so one time I had a scene where they are sitting on an underground train in London, and they're traveling, and the big guy has a shirt and it says, I like the Pope smokes dope. And there's a picture of the Pope with a joint, and he's blowing out, he's just like sitting there. And then you pull away in the comic and you realize they're sitting across from a bunch of nuns, Catholic nuns, and the nuns are all annoyed at him. And they get out of the train, and John Constantine says, dude, what are you doing? Like, they're nuns. You offended them. And he goes, no, I didn't. He says, it's the Pope. He's the head of the Catholic Church. And he goes, oh, I knew they were Catholic. I didn't know the Pope was. Right. And I thought that was and they said no. DC said no, because they are backed by a lot of Catholics. There's an awful lot of Catholics in the organization, apparently. And they said, no, this is crazy. And I changed it to an anti-abortion t-shirt with a no coat hanger sign. And they said that was acceptable. So the picture of the Pope smoking a joint was not. The picture of the anti-abortion sign offending the nuns was acceptable. And we changed it. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And so stuff like that happens in comics. Sometimes you'll get a note and you'll be like, I don't know where that note came. Okay, fine. It cracks me up though. It's so arbitrary.
Well, that is usually what censorship is in a way. It's always subjective, and sometimes some things pass and you're like, wait, I just sneaked that, and the other one's like, this small thing was like, they're saying no to that one. So again, I guess it's just subjective of the editor or the person that is or the lawyer that is on the other side, to consider it big or small.
It's the lawyer, right? And so, for example, I wrote a story in Hellblazer about I once saw an article about gymnasts, little girls, they're doing tumbling and they were being treated badly by their mentors. There's sexual and physical abuse, there's emotional abuse. And this whole thing was the culture of gymnastics. And this is in the 90s, way before what happened, in the 2000s. And I was very upset about it. I thought it was awful for these poor girls to be treated this way. And I wanted them to get their revenge. And I gave them their revenge in Hellblazer. There's a little girl and she's being treated badly by her coach. And in the end, they get the spirit of Bacchus in them and they kill the coach, and then they cannibalize, because the Bacchantes from Greek mythology would kill the men and then cannibalize them. But because of this, because she's bulimic, she eats the coach and then throws the pieces of the coach up. This vomits them. This is as bad as it gets. It's nasty. And they were fine with it. We wrote the whole book and I'm like, damn. The best part is when I met my wife, she started reading my stuff. She doesn't really care for comics one way. And she read that issue and she said to me, I don't get it. She said, you're a nice guy. How the hell do you think of this stuff? And I said, I think of it at 4 o'clock in the morning when I'm watching you sleeping. And she's like, ah!
Poor Melinda. Oh my God. Okay. Lockfran asks, Paul, how did you get involved in the trouble of telling the origin of Wolverine? Was it your idea to do it Tom Sawyer style?
Right. So that's two questions. How did I get involved? It's because I pitched it to them, and the stories. I'll do it very quickly because I think I've told it lots of times. But basically,
I'm more interested in the second part of the question, by the way.
Yeah. So basically, I was at Joe's editorial retreat, and I asked Bill Jemas, why do you say no to everything? Why do you, it's in the middle of the day, and he said he saw that I was frustrated, and I was there to advise as a creator who had been an editor, and he asked me, why are you frustrated? And I said, because you guys are supposed to be the house of ideas, and every time someone comes up with a good idea, you say no. Right, because I'm a punk, right? So I don't care. and Bill said, I agree with you. And he said, what are you thinking? And I said, honestly, man, like you always say things that cannot be done or should not be done. And so why don't you, like if you, Wolverine wanders around scratching his head, why don't you just tell his origin, and then it'd be interesting. That's how that project came about. We went over to Joe, we pitched it to the editors. Everybody said no, everyone said no, but then they realized, and then finally we got to do it. In terms of the Tom Sawyer part of it, that was something that was sort of like if you look at the first issue, it's called The Hill. And it's about a little boy that lives at the bottom of the hill and looks up at the farm. And that's how my brother and I grew up. Like we were the kids at the bottom of the hill, looking up at the farm with electricity. We didn't have any electricity. I'm not kidding. We were very poor. And so a lot of those elements were things from my life. And then it moved into this longer story set in Canada. It was funny because the first 3 episodes look like they're set in America, but in fact, they're set in Alberta. So Canadians hated me for the first 3 issues. And then when issue 4 came out and you found out he was born in Alberta, they would come up to me and hug me and give me cake. I'm a favorite son of Canada now.
Yeah, again, the misconceptions are rushing into judgment before you read the whole thing.
Just read the whole thing. But I couldn't tell them the end. So I went to one convention in Canada before they knew he was Canadian, and people were so upset. And I would say, keep reading. Just please keep reading, because you're going to kill me.
Not win-win, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and please don't kill me. And then I went to another one in Toronto just after issue 4 or 5 came out, and people were so in love with me. They were so happy. I never seen such joy as the people had when they found out Wolverine was indeed Canadian.
Yeah, but I guess that, in a way, that's their character. In a way, the Canadian guy, and they were panicking. We are going to lose the only character we have.
That's
The
right.
master is taking him away from us. So
right.
we were like, God, we didn't lose him.
That's right. That's right. It was like that. It was fun.
Let me see. I enjoyed, Felipe Gonzalez Hernandez says, I enjoyed your Frontline miniseries. For me, excellent ideas. How did it come to your mind to do it?
That's it. So Frontlines is a really interesting project, right? Obviously, you know how I feel about Ramon, right? Ramon Bucks is the guy. And if people ask me what happens when you write a script and it comes back and it looks different, and it's something that as writers we deal with all the time. I'm a very visual writer, so I try very hard to give the pieces, but I don't try to dictate. So of all the artists I've ever worked with, and I'm including Sean Phillips and any number of people, the one guy who gives me the script the way that I see it is Ramon, always. I will write a script, it comes back, and it looks the way that I expected it to look, which amazed me. So Ramon and I had done the story with Sally Floyd, Generation M.
Yep.
And I loved that story, and it was very heartfelt. It was about loss of a child, which I can't imagine, right? And and we were given the opportunity to do Frontlines. And this is the thing that people don't realize. We did issue 11. I think we did 11 issues of Frontline, and we finished issue 11 just before Mark Millar handed in book 2 of his. And Mark wasn't very well at the time. And so he was really having a bit of a struggle to write and to keep himself together. I've had it too. I broke my neck playing soccer years ago, and that time was very difficult. So Mark was really sick at the time, and we had a basic outline for Mark, but nothing else. And so I wrote 11 issues of that book with backstories, and the one that we did with Speedball / Penance with Steve Lieber, and we had like backup stories and poems that we did, like World War I poetry, which I loved doing those little stories. And Ramon and I completed that before Civil War was a thing. In other words, kind of to some extent, we were Civil War. Like our book was the thing that was finished before the other one was even done. And so I never got edited. No one ever edited a single word of what we wrote in that book. And all I know is they called me up at one point and said, man, we thought that book was going to sell this, and it sold like 5 to 6 times as many.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I said it was so crazy that the very next project Ramon and I were supposed to do was was World War Hulk Frontlines. Mm-hmm. And they called us and told us how to write it. And I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah, it was like, I remember it was like day and night. Yep. From one smooth experience to one that every 3 seconds you gotta change this page. Why?
Yep.
Because you gotta change the script, but there was no script notes. Now we're saying you have to change the script on the page.
Yep. It was crazy, and it was all to do with selling to Disney.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one thing that's very interesting about, if I can, one thing that's really interesting about Frontline's World War Hulk, right? So they tell me the idea, and the Hulk is coming back to Earth, and he's very angry. But you have to understand, this is just after Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. This is a story that I can tell, and I go, wow, I can tell. You mean the Hulk comes back, and everybody knows that it's coming, the storm is coming? We're going to tell the story of Hurricane Katrina. And they said, okay, here are the rules. The Hulk can't be seen to affect anybody badly. No one can die. All of these things. And I'm like, what are you doing? You literally have the best story, and you're telling me I can't tell that story? Like, the Hulk can't be seen to accidentally affect someone so that they get hurt, because that would make the Hulk a bad guy. This is stupid. And so you could tell it completely changed. That was the day that I knew, okay, everything's different at Marvel.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Mr. Jenkins, says Angel Perez. Best wishes for your new crowdfunding. the next chapter for Fairy Quest. Is this the end of the story? Is there a chance of another spin-off like Fiction Squad, like you did with Ramon?
Yes. So the answer to that is no, it's not the end of the story anyway, because there are 4 issues in Fairy Quest. And so this is part 3, and then we do part 4 anyway, right? So we're gonna do that part of it. The answer to the question, yes, on Fiction Squad, I'd like to do another one, and I would, like to get the original Fiction Squad back in print. And finally, there are loads of stories in. So Fablewood is a giant world of forest where all of the stories live together. I already have the plan for the next one, which is a woman from the world of romance fiction, and she goes to become an ambassador in the world of horror stories. She goes to live there, and she hates it because they're so different from her romance. But she begins to realize that people are they're just doing their job, and people are the same wherever you go, but it's cultural difference. And so that's why Fablewood is such a great world, because I can just mash up stories and put them together, and we can tell stories about our world, cultural differences, a view of crime, a view of friendship, fascism. We're looking at all of these things in the form of these fun little stories, So yeah, I'll do it for the rest of my career.
That's what I was going to say, that the best part about Fablewood, and in a way that's the same for Astro City with Kurt. I was talking to him a month ago. It's like that's the front for you to tell whatever story you want to tell. You have your own superhero world, but the superhero world is an excuse for you to tell the stories about life, what we're currently living through, everything that comes through your mind as a writer. That's only the place where you tell them, right? It doesn't matter what the kind of story is. It's just the story you want to tell.
That's absolutely right. And so, I just did a story sort of in a similar vein for Humanoids called Scarcity. And it was about a world of monsters where they all live together, and they should all live together. The trolls and the vampires and everyone have learned how to live in the city, and everything is great. And into this comes these people that start dividing everybody. Well, look at what's happening in our world, right? We're watching this happen. So for a kid, that story reads one way. And for us, it reads a different way. So it's very interesting,
Yeah, it's always about the nuances in your writing, which is the part that I love when I started reading you in Hellblazer so many years ago. I always love, and I've told you this to your face many times, that depending on who reads the story, you're going to find a different meaning.
Yep.
Because it's always affected in your writing by my own experience, or his own experience, or her own experience. The story you told before about, the gymnasts and all that. I'm sorry, but if you think a girl is going to read that story the same way I'm going to read it, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because women have gone through, have had to go through all the male chauvinism and all, the mistreatment and harassment for ages. So if a girl is a woman, reads that, she's probably going to say, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
And an idiot is going to say, this is disgusting. And I'm going to read it saying, I love it. So the way we are, what we've gone through, affects the way we read your stories.
Right. And I think that my approach to that is that when we read a book, here's our book. And when we open the book, we open a mirror.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we are. And so we look at ourselves. In the case of, say, the gymnast story, one thing that I think is very important is that I am seen. A lot of people talk to me and they say, man, you are a feminist guy. And I say, no, let me tell you what I am. I'm a storyteller, and story is everything. And so I never preach. I never preach from the page. I don't want to preach to anybody. I don't want to tell you you're right or you're wrong. We talked about this earlier on, but politically, I'm not even in the center. I'm outside. I grew up in the punk era, man. I don't care about politics. And so, I just want to write a good story, and a good story will, that makes us feel for the characters, will be one in which the main characters are well presented. And at that point, then you can get the thing from it, right? Yeah. It takes me back to one issue of Spider-Man I did with Paulo Rivera, and we wrote about a kid who was afflicted with cerebral palsy. And at one point, the kid who has cerebral palsy acts like a pain in the ass, right? And someone with a couple of people wrote in and they were like, how could you do that to the kid who had cerebral palsy? And I'm like, because he's a human being, right? He can be a pain in the ass. He can be good. He can be bad. Like, this is stupid. Don't argue with me about whether someone is good or bad because of their affliction. We're not doing bleeding heart stuff. We're not like writing characters the way that you think they should be. We're writing human beings.
Yeah. And if you preach with your story, I'm sorry, you're not telling a good story.
No.
You're preaching.
Yep.
And if you want to preach to your choir, that's fine. Go to a fucking church.
Yeah, no shit.
But you're telling a story that needs to involve everybody again, depending on your own vision or your own experience. By the end of the day, it's going to affect us, as you said, because the story is a mirror.
Yeah.
But if you feel the story is pandering to you, I'm sorry, I just get the fucking book and I close it. I am not interested.
Right. And I had a big experience with this book, Alters, that I did with Aftershock, right? So Alters had a series of characters, and one of them was a transgender character. She was like the main character for the first arc, right? And people sort of will go, well, transgender characters, why? Because they're fashionable now. And I'm like, listen, I pitched that story to Marvel and DC like 12 years ago, and both companies said, we love it. We just don't want to do new characters, which cracked me up because I'm like, I did the Sentry. How could you not? Of course you do new characters, but they didn't want to do it. And so when people would say to me, well, but then when they read it, the trans community, a couple of people were resistant, but most people were like, man, for a middle-aged white guy, you did okay, like, well done. This is who we are, because I want to listen. I want to understand. And just so that we're clear, Chalice, that character who came out in 2014 or something, right? Or 15, 16, 17, something like that. She wasn't my first trans character. The first trans character I wrote was in 2000. Her name was Sue, and she was in a book called The Agency. Mm-hmm. And she was a prominent character. We never even said she was trans. It's obvious that she's a trans character, but we didn't push that she was trans as part of her story. So we're of diverse people. Now, when I see forced diversity, and I will kind of fault Marvel for this, I just don't understand, why would you push the Asian Hulk and the young black girl who became, I think, like Iron Man or something? I didn't even frankly push it.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
When I look at that kind of thing, I'm like, you should create new characters, because we're trying to get this thing into these characters. But new characters would be amazing. Like, it'd be amazing to have these new characters. So pushing that it almost seemed like what would you call it? A marketing push, mm-hmm. and not a push and it must come from story. It must come from character. So I think that we sometimes get down the wrong paths. We should create new characters all the time. And mm-hmm. We don't create them. The mainstream don't create new characters, which is a shame.
Oh, see, going to that, somebody asked again about Sentry, which I know you love talking about Sentry, so let's do it again. Felipe Gonzalez says, the Sentry is one of your most complex characters. Was it a story you wanted to tell since your childhood? Was it your intention to show the dark side and mental problems?
Yeah, so as you may have heard, like the Sentry came from the Hour Man. I pitched the Hour Man because I really wanted to tell a story about addiction, and I thought Vertigo would do that. I thought they would actually let me use the Hour Man for it. They wouldn't. They said, we don't want to take a superhero character. I think there are problems internally in DC when you say, I need that character, and now you have to go mess around. So from that, Karen Berger had said, why don't you tell that story? It seems great. A story of addiction and a story of mental health issues. And I said, yeah, I like that. So I went back and I created the Sentry, and the idea, and it was the story I wanted to tell almost. The first issue, if you read the first issue of the Sentry, that stands by itself. You can actually take everything else away. It's a guy who may or may not have been a superhero. And by the end of the issue, you think, this guy's just mentally ill. And he walks out of the backyard and he walks up into the sky. And you're like, oh shit, maybe that guy is a superhero. Then we did the whole thing about his schizophrenia. And I want to say something about this. I am a meticulous writer. And so I had a diagnosis for the Sentry. He was a disorganized type schizophrenic with agoraphobia and social anxiety. And so I had a diagnosis that he should fit. And the schizophrenia meant that he was never quite always inside himself. And so the two pieces split and he was his own worst enemy. That's a great metaphor, man. Like, I am my own worst enemy and my enemy is the void and the sentry, right? And we don't even know which one is real. And to some extent, the void is more real than the sentry. You know, the sentry is an ideal. The void is who we are, right? Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
And so I got to tell the first one, and obviously he became a member of the Avengers and Marvel had something. I got to tell the second one with John Romita Jr. And people don't remember that one as much, but man, that was what I wanted to say. I got to write a story about where you think maybe this guy's nothing. Maybe he's just has a mental health issue and he's in an asylum. He's in a place for mental health patients. And we got to the end of that. And then I had one more arc, but I don't work with Marvel anymore, you know, but I had one more arc, which is that he becomes a god and he starts looking at creation and realizing, like, what are we? Are we nothing? It's all about like energy and what happens to us when we die and all that. That was what the 3 series arc was supposed to be. We just did 2 of them.
Hopefully, who knows? Maybe it'll happen. Who knows? Who knows? You know, right now, no, but who knows? Okay, I am always hopeful. You know me. Against reality sometimes. You know that I didn't do it anyway. Let's go with. I see, you know, the keyboard. I see the guitar. I've been there, so I know you always have it. But how much does music affect your writing?
A lot. You know, I am a guy that works in different media, right? So I do music. I love sound design. You ever seen a movie without the sound design put in? It's nothing. It's dead. So sound is massive. I voice direct. I work with actors like in that regard. And so music is a vital part of my life. I work on it all the time. Scored some stuff. So I have a new digital interactive project that's a new form of storytelling. And one of the things it has is sound as a cue. And one of the things that it does is it has music. And so I wrote the musical score for this thing. Right. I love this. I mean, I write music all the time for scores and things like that. I just wrote a song for a pretty well-known British artist. So they're recording that right now. So music is a big part of my life. And yet when I write, I don't listen to bands. I listen to just like quiet, like soft.
That was going to be my next question, because I know how close music is to you. But the second part is, when you write, do you listen to anything? You need absolute silence, or depends on the phase? As you said, you were showing, you know, how you prepare for everything.
Yeah.
And then you just go to the technical part in a way, you know, which is depending on the phase of the writing.
Yeah. Do
you listen or not to something?
I used to, but now I listen mostly to music that has no words in it. And I never listen to bands. I wouldn't listen to like punk music or the Police or you know, some musician or something like that, because I listen to the bass line. I take it apart. I concentrate on the music. I listen to like very quiet, like space, you know, the kind of music that you listen to in like when you're getting a massage. You'd be amazed. I listen to that crap all the time, right? because I can't concentrate but I need the wash of sound. And there are some actually brilliant musicians. There's a guy called John Serry, if anybody's interested, a guy called John Serry, who is a genius about sound separation. I listen to John Serry a lot. I listen to, you know, all the music with no dialogue, because I can't concentrate. I listen to bands and I'm like, that guy did this, and now that was cool. And now I'm like, I can't hear words and type at the same time.
Another question here. Oh, Ramon Bax. Hello. Ramon has connected to the chat and wanted to say hello. Looney Comics asks, the whole mystery about that character, the Sentry, he means, and the false backstory was also your idea. He says that, you know, the Fox backstory, and referring to the one that was published on Wizard.
Oh yeah, no, that was not my idea. No, that was Joe Quesada's idea. So, and it's kind of funny. So Joe said it's really hard to do new characters, and what happened was I had come in, we'd written the Inhumans, and this is how stupid I am about this stuff. I wrote the Inhumans, and it won an Eisner, and they loved me, and they were like, "You can do anything you want to. We want you to write whatever." And I'm like, "I want to do the Sentry." And they're like, they said like, "No, like not that.
Not again."
You've been pitching that to us for years, and we don't want to do the Sentry." And I said, "Please let me do it." Now I persuaded Jay, and Jay said, "Yeah, I love that. I want to do that." So now they got me and Jay as a team, and here's the crazy thing, David. You know, Ralph Macchio asked me to write Spider-Man maybe 2 years, maybe more before I ever wrote it. I turned him down. I'm the guy that turned down Spider-Man because I didn't know what to write, right? I didn't know because I couldn't work out the continuity. And so I didn't know what to do. So before this is happening, then we get to do the Sentry. And Joe said, "Well, we're going to have to find a way to sell it. Because so the way to sell it," he said, I will say that the character looks very much like a Stan character. He's weak. He has a weakness, which is his strength. So he's schizophrenic. Daredevil can't see properly. You know, Peter Parker is a teenager with problems. All of these characters have a weakness, and your one has a great weakness. We need to make this a Stan character. So they created this crazy idea that Stan had originally done it, but forgot that he created it. And I found it in a folder, but no one was, because that was the story of the Sentry. So for 1 year, we went around these bloody conventions, and I would sit next to Joe, and I'm a horrible liar. My wife makes fun of me because I suck at lying. So when I try to lie, I get all red, and then she's like, "I know you're lying." And I'm like, "Come on, man, like give me a break." Everyone I suck at it. And so for a whole year I had to say, yeah, I found this thing that Stan had created, and it was in a folder, and I sucked. Joe would basically just say, "Just shut up, stop talking, you know, like just act like you can't remember anything, and I'll do it." And so Joe would lie for me. He was really good at it, and we did this whole thing at conventions, but it was funny. I was terrible at it, but it was a great idea.
It worked.
Yeah, it
right?
worked. It worked.
And how did you guys get Stan to tag along with this thing?
They asked Stan, you know, we have this way of doing it, I think, and he liked it. I will tell you that I'm not much of a fan kind of person. There are very few people that I would wait to speak to. Neil Armstrong would have been one. Yep. Muhammad Ali would be I got my Muhammad Ali shirt on, I think, actually. Muhammad Ali, the Dalai Lama. These are three people that I think are very important to me. Stan, like many people, you know, he's a comic guy. And so obviously I knew very much about who he was. And when I got married to my wife, Stan was very kind, and he kept writing and saying, "She's too good for you." I'm like, "Yes, she is." But I would tell you probably that one of the best days of my career is that when we were working on the Sentry and Stan had seen the idea and seen what I wanted to make, he called Joe, and Joe called me and he said, I got to tell you something. He said, "I just got a call from Stan, and Stan wanted me to give you a message. You ready?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want you to tell that boy he's a genius." So Stan called me a genius.
Wow.
I think is pretty fucking cool.
Which, yeah. Yeah. Oh my God.
He appreciated how the story of the Sentry was built and how it fit the world that he had been instrumental in creating with Kirby and Ditko and all of these people. He knew that the Sentry fit, and it was a Superman as well that Marvel could have. It was a giant powered character, but he had a weakness that would break him every time. So Stan really appreciated it, and man, I'll tell you what, getting that message, I was sort of like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you just mentioned Neil Armstrong. Look what I have here. So you see, we agree on that too.
50, you know, that's 51 years ago today.
Yep.
Yeah.
The original flight plan. And also, this is my charging
There's a charging station. That's great.
I have a charging station right here. I don't want to pull the cable,
Yeah.
but my charging station is the original launch pad for Apollo 11.
Oh, that's amazing, man. I love it. I love it. And so as a little boy, I mean, for me, it's just being, it's seeing that unfold and knowing that they walked on the moon and just being so intrigued with it. That to me, as a little kid that grew up in the country, would be the ultimate. That was big. So yeah.
So somebody else just came over to say hello. Andres Guinaldo. Greetings to the great writer who opened the doors of Marvel for me.
Yeah, Andres, how you doing, man? It was great to see you. Like, that was great work too. I love working with Andres. That was good.
That book was crazy. Did you have fun doing that? Because in case people doesn't know, I'm pretty sure you know, but Andres is talking about Paul and him did a Son of Hulk together, which was Andres' first work for Marvel.
Yeah.
And you decided to change the Son of Hulk. That's the story that.
Yeah. That I will say this, that like Andres, that work was great. I mean, it was great to see the artwork come in for that project, right? It was one of the more compromised projects. It was kind of like at the time for me at Marvel, where now they had started saying, we want this, we want that, we want this, we want that, which made no sense because up to that point, they had not done that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I loved working with Andres on that. It was great to see that art become alive. And, it's such a privilege sometimes when you write a script and you get artwork back and you look at it and you go like, man, I wish I was an artist, but wow, I can't draw, but that looks amazing. So that stuff was stellar, man. That stuff was amazing. It's just the Son of Hulk. I'm sort of like, yeah, it was okay. I mean, I don't feel like we said anything, really. We didn't say much. That's normally my style, is to say more about life or the world. It just was a story that, at that time, my work was a bit compromised because we're trying to work out what a Marvel want. I don't even understand what they want anymore,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really intrigued by, I remember, the series originally had the Son of Hulk, whatever, and then you guys move, as Andres is pointing to, Hero Kala.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different story because we moved from the, Hulkling strong guy, and you moved to the, in theory, weak guy that had to, beat everybody using his wits.
Yeah. Yeah.
But was that your decision or it was Marvel's?
No, it was more Marvel's, right? And so I like I said, I mean, it was that point. That was around about the time when I realized this, I don't know if I'm a Marvel. I don't know if it works for them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't pitch a thing that I think would work for Marvel and have it exist. They would tell me, we think we need to do this. We think we need to do that. We think this is a good idea. And I'm like, you've never done that with me in my entire time here. From 1998 to 2006 or 7, all I ever did was make a lot of money for Marvel and succeed. And you used most of my stuff in your films, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of done, probably worked out pretty well for you. So why start telling me what it is that you need? Nothing to do with my ego. It just didn't seem like a very good business decision. It didn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that was around about the time when they were saying, well, we want this and we want this element. We want that. And I don't think that works for me. I'm probably not your guy at that point,
Mm-hmm. With this situation, I always say about when people tells me there is not enough comic book readers, I always go back and say, no, that's not true. There is readers.
Mm-hmm.
And Raina Tegelmeier is an example, selling 1 million copies of her last book. It's always the same answer from me. And I want to know your point of view on this, which is, it's not that there is no readers. It's that we don't give them what they want to read.
I agree. And so I'll give you a perfect example, right? I can go to a convention, and so as you know, we're doing the Fablewood stories. We're doing the Fairy Quest, and I can go to a convention, and I can lay out the origin of Wolverine, and I can lay out Fairy Quest, and I will sell 2 copies of Origin of Wolverine and 150 of Fairy Quest. Because the fact is that people come up, they see the art, they see the story, and every single time as well, they read Fairy Quest, they come back and say, when's the next one coming out? I need the next one. I need the next one. Like, they really want this thing. That's why I know it's like worth publishing, right? With Marvel and DC and these mainstream comics and these things, you know, it's just become honestly a homogenized form of entertainment where it's just like, you know, chew it up, spit it out, chew it up, spit it out, do this thing. And that's not to denigrate. Listen, there are some great writers working in comics, right? And great creators and great artists. It's a wonderful way of telling a story. But the business itself went away again. You know, we with Marvel Knights, Marvel were desperate. They were out of business if we didn't get it right. And so they did the last thing that a corporation will ever do. They trusted the creators. And we went off and we did it. You know, it's a funny thing. I've mentioned this one before. I remember having a conversation with Joe, and Joe said, you're doing pretty well, kind of thing. And Bill Jemas really likes you, and everything's doing out great. Do you know anyone else that'd be halfway decent that we could bring in that's actually kind of like you? And I said, yeah, I work with this guy, Brian Bendis, over at Todd McFarlane. He was writing Sam and Twitch. And he's like, yeah, I remember Bendis. You know, so that's how Bendis got into Marvel, was that, like, I recommended him to Joe. Mm-hmm. In those days, Bendis, myself, you know, Garth was writing The Punisher, Joe and Jimmy and Kevin Smith. You know, these things were like, they let us do whatever we wanted to do. So why do we go away from that formula? Why would you not want that continue? Because look what's happened. Now they're confused. The stories seem like very confused and difficult, and it's hard to put them all together, and everything is driven by marketing. Yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you that Bill Jemas said the best thing I ever heard anyone say about comics. When we had that first editorial retreat, he said to the editors, you guys are too scared. Here's what's going to happen now. I'm marketing. I'm going to tell me what you want to make, and we'll sell it. We are never going to tell you what to make. And that worked perfectly up until that moment I told you when they were about to sell to Disney. And at that point, they said, okay, marketing is now going to tell you what to sell. It's a shame.
Yeah. That reminds me of, you know, when Peter David started to do the Hulk. That for years he was told nothing because the Hulk didn't sell. So he could tell, you know, for like, I don't know how many years, 10, 12, whatever years, he could tell all the stories he wanted to sell. And it was, you know, a progression from a stupid Hulk in a way to Grey Hulk, then Professor Hulk, etc., etc. And then it's like, why did it change? Oh, because it started selling.
Yep. And so they like, Peter's experience is exactly my experience, which is they couldn't give themselves away. They were going into bankruptcy. They were going to chapter 7, and they were this close. And then once the creators, and it doesn't come from the characters. If it came from the characters, they wouldn't have been in bankruptcy, would they? It comes from the creators. And so the creators are brought in to fix it. And at a certain point, they go, yeah, we don't need you anymore. Characters. It was always the characters. Right? You go, okay. So my experience is exactly the same as Peter David's.
Yeah. And so then what's next in terms of, you know, we're talking about how to grow a bigger audience, how to get there. You talk about, you know, Fable Boot, you talk about Fairy Quest. I was talking about Raina Tegelmeier, just a million examples. What's the venue you think of the future? And it could be digital too, of course, because we've talked about digital. What's the venue of the future to reach more readers, in your opinion? And you've been in all the parts of the business. You've been in merchandising. You've been in editorial. You've been, you know, as a creator. So you know the whole thing much better than other people who's, you know, only being in bits and parts of it. What do you think is the way to go?
So with digital, it has to be done correctly. We can't just get a comic and put it up like that, you know. We can't, you know. You are going to have to pause and talk to the audience for 1 second, because if my wife calls me one more time, there must be something. Hold on 1 second.
Go. Bueno, chicos, en castellano y en inglés. Está llamando su mujer. Si queréis hacer alguna preguntilla más, y si no, vamos cortando porque vemos que tiene un asunto familiar. Como vosotros veréis, ¿vale? In English, he's on the phone with his wife, so it's important. So we're probably going to have to cut. If you have any other questions, just make them now. just in case. Okay. Hmm. Uh, I don't know what to say. But if you know um, about his career, we talked about Son of Hulk. We talked about Humans. He's laughing in the back, as you can see.
Yeah, she can't find where she's going, and she has the worst sense of direction of any human being I've ever met. And so she is persistent. Like, I'm like, babe, I can't take your call right now. She can't find the place that she's trying to go. Babe, I
Oh,
can't take
don't worry about it. You know, I think we cover. If you know, if you need to help her, we've talked about cover most things. So you can go and help Melinda.
I'll help her in a couple of minutes. But yeah, we'll finish up and then I'll help her because she's a
Okay, so yes. So we'll just finish with this question we were discussing. You know,
So
the new venues. What's the future? Where do we need to go as an industry, in many ways, to reach more people?
So I am doing digital right now, but I'm not doing digital comics. It's a digital interactive form of storytelling. We cannot do digital comics. Don't put your comic on this thing, right? Unless you can interact with it and tell it, because no one wants to read a comic on this thing. No one wants to read it on their pad. Not even digital comics are not going to work. Like, I get it through your head. Digital comics, taking comics and just putting them up on a screen, you're not going to make revenue from that because it's not intimate. You don't take it home and sit with it and hang with it and read it. You do with your phone. You can do things with your phone that's very intimate. You can do it with a comic book. It's very intimate to read. But once you try to put a comic onto this thing, there's nothing there. You squint to see the things. It doesn't work. So you have to build the content directly for this project, for this thing. Now then, to me, it only comes from story, David. It only comes from story. And so when a corporation like Marvel or DC says to me, yeah, thanks for doing story anyway, this is what we want you to do now, I go, well, you know, you don't want story, you want event or marketing. That's not story. And it amazes me how many films come out that were not story, they were driven by marketing events. It amazes me how many, there's no story there, there's no heart, right? There's no there. And so I think that it's up to us to fight for that. And one of the ways in which I think I am going, and I think a lot of people might go this, is the Kickstarter route and the self-publishing and the amalgamation. I've talked to a few fellow Kickstarters recently. You know, Brian Polito's doing really well. Billy Tucci's doing really well. People that have their content that, and I think there's going to be this group of people that do this regularly, and Kickstarter is going to be their form, because I got a worldwide audience all year round, and then I just take the excess and I put it on a store and I sell it in the online store, and we keep selling it and we keep selling it, right? And so I don't think that the major publishers want that or anything to do with that, but that's what's going to keep the core of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And so there are some publishers that will do it. Aftershock have been doing it. You know, I've done a couple of books with them. The smaller publishers will want to do it, and they're always going to be beaten up by the bigger publishers. And so the comic industry itself sucks. The industry sucks. Mm-hmm. It's sucked for the 30 years that I've worked in it. It's completely illogical, doesn't work, doesn't make any sense. You're putting all the onus on retailers. You're asking them to basically speculate all of this time and energy and money. I just saw Brian Hibbs trying to make sense of what's happening with DC and the way that they're selling their comics now. DC have taken the prep time for a retailer of like the 4 days it would take them to order, and now they've cut it down to like 1 to 1.5 because of what they want. All that Brian says is, well, that's going to cut into their orders. I can't order their books the way, you know, so the sales will go down. The comic industry is a poorly run industry, terribly run industry. So, you know, we need to kind of change that, right? Someone asked me the other day, how could you fix the comic book industry? What would you do to fix it? You know what my answer was? Make me the editor-in-chief of DC or Marvel. Mm-hmm.
If you ask the
question, like, because those of us who are creators and understand and care and get it could fix this in a minute. We could fix it. We did with Marvel Knights. I've seen it work. So we could fix it. but we need to be allowed to fix it now.
Yeah, and there's also need to be a big conversation. Like stop it with the Marvel versus DC, because it's not like that anymore. It couldn't
No.
be. It's like a big conversation, is sitting down saying, how do we work in common, all publishers, as a union? I
Yep.
know that word in comics is hated, but I don't care, because
Yep.
I think it's needed. We need unions for creators. We need unions and we need publishers to just get together as a whole and say, we need to change distribution models and make it so we can all reach more people.
Yeah, I agree. And so I hope that we will find a way to do that.
Yeah,
I really do. And we should be doing it. I want us to do it. So don't mistake my passion for saying the comic industry sucks. No, the comic industry I love and I want it to do well. But the way that we do it right now sucks. Come on, guys, fix it.
Yeah.
We've done it. We've shown how to fix it before. It was called Marvel Knights. We've shown how to fix it before, right?
Mhm.
Do it again. Fix it, because it's a mess. And we could do something great if you just gave the trust to the creators to work with the editors, and you empowered your own editors to actually do good work instead of just fit what marketing said. Come on, guys, get it right.
Yeah, by the end of the day, it's and you and I have talked about this a million times, but that's going to be my last phrase before letting you go with Melinda, which is stop the short-term thinking.
Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
that's what got us where we are now. And you just mentioned the DC thing. I am not going to presume to know anything about that. But if you react, sometimes the reactions are worse, because you just react and then, okay, but what's next?
Yeah.
The problem is that we don't know what's next, but you have reacted already, so you created a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Maybe. But I'm not talking about this in general. I'm talking about the short-term thinking of the comic industry. As I said, this is something Paul, have discussed very often, which sometimes is, if we stop and think and we all talk about what we want to do, it'll probably work. But if you rush to conclusions and decisions in a year, it's not that you're going to have the same problem again. As Paul said, is that you're going to have a bigger problem. And then how do you fix it?
Yep. It's look at the bigger problem that you get. Okay, you do collectible covers and reissue #1. Okay, so you get a bump, but then it goes lower again, and then you get a bump, but it goes lower again and lower again every time you do a bump, because you know what? No one wants a #1 for the 7th year in a row. No one cares, man. They're not collectible. It's a lie, and it's the same lie that they told in the 90s. Chromium covers, special covers, they're all going to be collectible. Hey, kids, buy this book and it'll be worth $20,000. Well, guess what? It's not going to be worth 20 grand if there are 7.5 million of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They're not going to be worth a lot of money. You lied to people. You gave them a bill of goods. And so we're doing the same thing. Hey, kids, these are collectible. These are #1s. Stop it. Come on. It's not that hard to get good creators in to write the best stuff and let them actually create. But that to be the last resort of creative companies sometimes. And so I hope that we will allow it.
There's a silver lining to end this on a happy note. It's, even with all this we're discussing, the numbers keep growing. I saw the numbers last week. The numbers keep growing. The formats keep growing. It's like, even with all this we just discussed, the sales are growing.
Yeah,
so that's telling you, imagine if you did it the right way.
Yeah. Well, it's also telling me that COVID means that people are buying that kind of product because they're doing it on, people need to be entertained at this moment.
I'm telling you the sales from last year. Last week, I will send you the link. They just released the numbers for, the whole 2019.
Yeah.
And the numbers have grown in a really healthy way.
Good. So
solidly in graphic novels are happening again, are growing more than monthlies, etc. But you see, it's healthier.
Yes.
Than we thought it would be. So that's why I was saying, then imagine if we did it the right way.
Yep, I agree. If we did it the right way, you'd be making 3 times as much. You'd have the hearts of people that want it so much, and you get new audiences, for God's sake. Listen, you need books like Fairy Quest and there, like Andy Runton, his Owly book, and all of these incredible, Renata Telgemeier, like these this stuff is a brilliant, right, for an audience.
Mhm.
You need that.
Yeah.
You need to stop writing mini Thor and baby Hulk, right? Kids they'll vaguely look at it, but they want to be entertained across the board. So
Mhm.
let's build the industry back up with core storytelling. And who does that? The creators.
Mhm.
Support the creators as a company, and you will have what you need.
Absolutely. And with that note, creator power, guys, creator power. We're gonna stop for today. He has a wife who's in charge and is gonna kill him if he doesn't respond. So I love Paul. I don't want him to die, and I love Melinda, and I don't want him to kill him. So I don't want him to kill him. So thank you very much for being here, Paul. Thank you so much for being here. Love you, brother.
Good to talk to you, brother.
See you really, really soon somewhere. Be it there or here somewhere.
I hope so, man. And I'm going to go save my wife.
Take care of yourself, okay? Take care of the kids and your wife and yourself.
Bye-bye.
Let me know if she gets. And to all of you, thank you so much. Have a good day. With us tomorrow. Con nosotros mañana. Sergio Dávila y Jordi Tarragona. See you all tomorrow. Bye. In 3, 2, 1.